So I wasn't supposed to be the speaker this morning, but I was supposed to be the speaker this morning. I actually believe that there's somebody here today who might not have shown up but for Brian Kelly being the speaker, who actually is supposed to hear this message. And Brian will be back. He does, again, sends his deep regrets that he couldn't be with us this morning. When I had set up those slides about why, it was not knowing I was going to be pitch hitting this morning for Brian. And the talk that I've had, and this is a talk I gave at NCS Manhattan back in June, and I've had it in my back pocket, and I almost did it last fall, and a couple of the guys on the leadership team, Matt and Peter, they said, you know what, hang on to it in case we ever have kind of a speaker cancel at the last minute. Well, this is the last minute. But the talk is about why. And it's just sharing with you the 7 stages of my journey to the why of work and understanding the intersection of faith and what we do every day, our work. So the 7 stages of my journey to the why of work. But first, just to see who's out there, just to get a sense, I see Colby, but if you're actually in full-time Christian ministry, would you raise your hand? Just want to get a sense of the room. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 in full-time Christian ministry. You know, I was as clueless as you are, the rest of you. Only 5 to 9% of Christians actually understand the intersection between faith and work. Every single one of you is in full-time Christian ministry. One of the things here that we try to get across is that there is no divide between the sacred and the secular. The things that you do, the work that you do is a sacred calling. Your mission field is the workplace. And it is not a lesser sacred calling than the calling of a priest or a youth pastor. It's just a different calling in a different place. But if we don't understand that why, it's just a job. But it's not just a job. I thought that faith and work had nothing to do with each other. So stage 1 of the journey I call no intersection, shallow faith plus dreams. I grew up, we went to church every Sunday. I was an altar boy from 8 to 18. Church for me was more about community. It was a place that, it was a very small church. It was a Polish National Catholic Church. It was a place where people gathered afterwards to celebrate victories and birthdays and to console each other during hard times. But the services were in Polish, so I really didn't get anything out of the services themselves. But it was something we dutifully did every day, and I believed in God. When I was 8 years old, I knew I wanted to be a lawyer. I don't know why. I have no idea why. No one in my family had gone to college, so there were no lawyers in the family. I didn't know any lawyers, but I just knew at a very early age, at 8 years old, that I wanted to be a lawyer. And I knew at 8 years old I wanted to go to Harvard College, and I wanted to go to Harvard Law School. I had heard something said somewhere that they were the best, and so I determined at 8 years old that that was what I wanted to be. I'd be a lawyer, and I had this dream of going to Harvard. And it was at a young age that I had my first prophetic word. I only know this, think about this now, thinking back. It was when I was being confirmed. So 13 years old, the bishop lined us up. There were about a dozen of us who were being confirmed that day. And he went down the line, and he said, this was after the service, congratulations, 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 congratulations. And then he looked me in the eye, and he said, congratulations, you're going to be a priest one day. Congratulations, 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 congratulations. And I thought this bishop was nuts. Why did I think he was nuts? Because I knew what I was going to be. I was going to be a lawyer. And being a lawyer had absolutely nothing to do with being a priest. And it's only 50 years later that I sort of realized the beginning of the journey and that first prophetic word. But for me, it was a complete disconnect between faith and career. Well, stage 2 of the journey, living the dream, all work. I ended up getting into Harvard College, and when I went to school, I became a Christmas and Easter faith practitioner. It was very easy to rationalize. I couldn't find a Polish National Catholic Church in Boston, Massachusetts, and so why would I go to church? I did end up getting into Harvard Law School, and when I was 13, I actually decided the law firm I was going to work for, because the owner of the factory where my father worked, it was an antenna factory, made car antennas. And my father had worked there since he came out of the Army. He started as a janitor and worked his way through all the positions and was the plant manager. And he had shared with the owner, who he'd known for years, that my dream of being a lawyer. And one day he came home with a pile of that, remember that crinkly rolled up fax paper? And it had an article that the owner of the company, who was a Jewish man from New Jersey, had sent to him. And it was an article about the best law schools in America. And he knew I wanted to go to law school, and so he had sent this to my father. My father brought it home, and I looked at it, and I thought, well, this is very interesting, but I already know where I want to go to law school. But interleafed was an article about the best law firms in America. And it started out and it said, any survey of the best law firms in America can only start with New York, and any survey of the top law firms in New York must start with Cravath, Swaine, and Moore. And so at the age of 13, I said, well, that's where I want to work after I go to Harvard College and Harvard Law School. And I pursued that dream, unburdened by faith or thoughts of what faith had to do with anything in my life. And that dream unfolded. I went to Harvard Law School. I got a job at that law firm, became a partner in that law firm, got married. At 32, I had decided when I was very young that I was not going to get married before the age of 32. I got married at 32. I had an uncle, a Jewish uncle, who told me, don't get married before you're 32. He was a very successful dentist, and he said, don't get married before you're 32. Live your life, build your career, have that time. And so I had that stuck in my head. Now, I absolutely believe that God had used him to stick that in my head because he knew when Lisa was going to come in my life at the age of 31. So 32, I get married. We have these 2 beautiful children. We're living in London, and we were living the dream. But when I achieved that dream that I'd had since 8 years old, I remember standing in my new partner's office before my big desk and thinking, is this it? I mean, is this, my entire life has been laser focused on getting here. It should feel way better than this. And all I could think about was, I actually had no new thing that I was aiming for, that I was going to be sitting at this desk for the next 30 years. And it was this empty feeling. I was sharing this story once in London at a church that we had gone to there, and a man came up to me afterwards and he said, you know, that story really resonated with me. I worked for Goldman Sachs. I was on the executive committee. When Goldman went public, I took home the 4th highest amount of money out of the Goldman IPO. I was sitting in my office. I had more money than I could ever spend, I could ever imagine. My whole life had been about this, And I sat there with the realization of how much money I had, and I had this hugely empty feeling. And I didn't understand it. Stage 3, the faith ramp up, hit by a sledgehammer. So in 2003, October 5th, 2003 to be specific, God hit me over the head with a sledgehammer. I came to the realization that my marriage had been in a death spiral and I was clueless to it. My wife had emotionally checked out of the marriage almost a year earlier, and I had no idea. She uttered the words simply when I asked her what was wrong. I don't know where to start. I'm not happy, and I can't go on like this. I knew in that moment that I was dealing with something that I couldn't control with the tools that I had so efficiently controlled my world. Hard work, money, and intelligence were my tools of control, and I just knew they weren't going to work. And I did something that I hadn't done in a long time. I cried out to God to help me. And within 2 weeks, through a series of coincidences, he led me to this house in New Canaan, where I walked in to 200 men I didn't know, and started hearing about Jesus, and hearing about his promises, and hearing about who I was meant to be as a husband, and meant to be as a father, and meant to be as a man. And those men began to walk with me on this journey. And on December 5th, 2003, I committed my life to Jesus and handed it over 2 months after that sort of time when the sledgehammer hit. These group of guys, an energy group, the very first energy group actually walked with me through a year of this, encouraging me when things were down. And God showed up in some incredible ways. And there were times whenever people said it was hopeless and I should give up and I should move on with my life, God would show up and in various ways encourage me and say, no, hang on. And for me, it was really simple, because my faith was new. It says in this book, Malachi, I hate divorce, saith the Lord. Well, that was pretty clear. And I thought, he hates divorce. We got married. We made a commitment to each other and to him. He blessed us with these 2 children. It must be that God's will is that our marriage can be restored. And I just prayed that he would make me change into the man that I ought to be. And these men were with me, which is one of the reasons that every week I get up here and I encourage you to show up at the Sugar Bowl, because that's really where it happens. That's really where friendships develop. A year later, God miraculously restored our marriage, turned my wife's heart around in 24 hours. It was actually bookends of faith. The beginning of it was me taking a leap of faith that God actually was true to his word, and when he said, nothing is impossible, I will never leave you or forsake you, I will never let you go through something that you can't handle, that it was true. And the bookend on the back was my wife taking a leap of faith that God actually could find a path for our marriage that wasn't the bad marriage it had been, and it wasn't getting out of it, but there was actually this third path, which at that point was unimaginable to her, but she took a leap of faith. That story is all laid out in much greater detail in Eric Metaxas's book, Miracles. It's a chapter called God and Marriage, and I'm happy to send a PDF of that chapter to anybody who is interested. I'll actually put it up with the talk if anybody's interested in that chapter. So that was the ramp-up of my faith. Stage 4, Christian at work, clueless. So here I am. I have this newfound faith. I'm on fire for the Lord. And I go back to my office. And I have no idea what to do. Absolutely no idea what to do. I was clueless about what my faith had to do with practicing law. And I've actually sort of thought about this, and identified a few of the things that happen to people when they begin to try to get their faith and their work as one. The first is what I did. I agonized. I had no idea. Some people get past the stage of agonizing and they get to individualizing, and that's as far as I got. What's individualizing is, right, you think it's kind of about how you behave. I'm going to be a better person. I'm going to treat people nicely. Maybe I'm going to put a Bible on my bookshelf, which I did, and no one noticed it except this one IT worker who kind of sheepishly said to me, "I see a Bible there. Are you a Christian?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Me too." That was my moment. And I tried to be nice. I looked for opportunities to pray for people, but it was just about me. It was just about how I changed my personal life. Another stage I think people get to is monetize, and that's where you hear an evangelical message that says that business is a platform for doing kingdom work. There are only two types of things you can legitimately do from the platform of business, and that is you can evangelize people or you can make money to give to people who do real kingdom work. And I think a common response to that is, evangelize? That sounds scary. It's probably illegal in the workplace. I'll just make more money and give more money away. And of course, you get a great pat on the back from the church. And yes, go make more money and give us more money. Great job. That's not the answer either. I did that too. The next one is cosmeticize. This is when you hear the message, integrate your faith into your work. There was a great quote from Max Dupree, who was the chairman of Herman Miller Furniture, who apparently once said, talking about integrating your faith into your work is like talking about integrating your marriage into your sex life. Completely ass backwards. But what happens when someone says, hey, bring your faith into your work? What a lot of people do is they sprinkle some Christian fairy dust over their business. They start a Bible study, maybe they stick a Bible verse on their packaging, or they're bold enough to put God in their mission statement, and they do all this, but the heart of the organization hasn't changed. The way they treat people hasn't changed. The way they treat customers hasn't changed. How they treat vendors. It's like putting a fish bumper sticker on your car and then flipping people off in traffic. There's another one, prosperitize. Prosperitize is, you often hear this message, if you live out your faith in your work, God will bless it and you will be more profitable and your business will thrive and your business will boom. Well, that's nothing but the prosperity gospel. You're doing it for all the wrong reasons. Your why is completely misguided. It's not about doing it so that you will get richer. But these are some of the paths that sort of flow, I think, from agonize, individualize. I then got a second prophecy. This was in 2008. Some of you know Dr. J. Dr. J was an NCS staple, and he called me up one day and he said, I need to come see you. It was Martin Luther King Day, weekend, 2008. He said, it's urgent I come and see you. So he comes over to the house, and he comes up and he says, God has been downloading to me about you for 2 days. Can I come in and share this message? I've written it all down. And he shared this message, and it was essentially, you are meant to start a Christian law firm where greed is not the creed, serving clients for whom greed is not the creed. And to be honest, it didn't really speak to me at the time. I was still practicing in my practice in New York. And I thanked him, and I tucked it away and didn't think about it again. Stage 5, work removed into the wilderness. So that was in early 2008. He said that to me. It didn't speak to me. In 2009, I had what is my Abraham moment, where I really felt God say to me through various channels and different things that I was meant to leave this practice I'd had for 23 years, and he had a different plan for my life. And so I walked away from the firm and the partnership and said, all right, Lord, I'm here, I'm yours, now what? 2 weeks later, Jim Lane called me up and he said, I've been doing NCS for 13 years, I'm burnt out, I really need to take a break. If I were to take a 6-month sabbatical, would you take over NCS for me while I'm away? And I said, well, I guess maybe that's the next thing. So I stepped in. It was about a year, and then Jim came back, and he had visions about what to do with NCS. It was right at that stage where NCS was moving from just being this group in his house and chapters starting around the country. And I kind of launched into that. And I gave God a deadline. I said, Lord, you told me there's this new plan you have for me. Well, I'm going to give you 6 months to show me what it is before I try to figure it out myself. I'll give you 6 months of kind of just you can show me. Well, at 6 months, almost right at 6 months, Lisa and I were sharing our marriage testimony at a marriage retreat. And I was uttering the words, unconditional love is what it says it is. It's unconditional. You can't put conditions on it like, God, fix my spouse in 6 months or I'm out of here, but I'll give you 6 months to fix her. And as I uttered those words, I heard a voice inside say, it doesn't only go for your marriage. And I knew how silly it was that I gave God 6 months. Oh, it's been 11 years. But in that process, there was a search for identity. I didn't realize how much my work was who I was. I mean, what is the first question you're asked in any social setting in America? What do you do? We identify ourselves by our jobs, our careers. And guys who've been out of work, you know how hard that question is. Because when someone asks you that question and you don't have a business card or you don't have something to tell them, you feel identityless. It's really hard. And I was in that. And what did I clasp onto? I clasped onto the New Canaan Society. And I had a business card printed up that said New Canaan Society so that I could answer the question. I was desperately searching for who I was. I'll never forget when Dave Dravecki, the San Francisco Giants pitcher, spoke at NCS when we were down at the Hibernian Club. Dave Dravecki, if you may remember, his arm broke from a cancer while he was pitching. It had to be amputated. His career was over. And he came and he spoke, and he came up with one hand, and he said, my identity was Dave Dravecki, pitcher for the San Francisco Giants. And it was even on a card, and he held up his baseball card. And he said, and then one day, and he took that card in one hand, put it in his teeth, and tore it in half. And he said, and one day, that was gone. And I didn't know who I was. And he challenged us, and he asked, what's on your card? And can it be taken away? Stage 6, the 10-year wilderness journey, bringing faith and work together. So in that time, where did the Lord lead me? So leadership in the New Canaan Society became a big part of what I was doing, both in the chapter level and then since 2007, but also nationally as Jim was laying out the new framework and for NCS nationally. As part of NCS, I also got very involved in the faith and work movement. I got involved in a number of other nonprofits during that time. And in 2012, that second prophecy from Dr. J got revisited. He called me up. He said, did you ever do anything about that word I gave you back in 2008? And I sheepishly said, no, not really. He said, well, can I share a few more things with you? I said, sure. And he did. He shared a few more things. And I thought now I had some time. I went away for a few days, and I prayed about it. And I really felt God say, yes, you're supposed to do this, and you're supposed to do this with people like X and Y, and they were two NCS guys who were solo practitioners. I wrote it down in my journal, their names, and I tucked it away, told nobody but Lisa, and forgot about it again. So 2 years later, 2014, one of those two guys, whose names I'd written down, called Lisa, and she said that told her that he and the other guy whose name I'd written down were thinking of starting a Christian law firm. And did she think I had any interest in joining them? So I finally said uncle, and the three of us sat down to figure out what that was. Within 6 months, one of the guys just felt this was not what he was meant to do, and he left. And within a year later, the other guy said that he actually got offered an in-house position with a client with an offer he couldn't refuse. And so I now found myself on my own with this thing we were calling Integris, this Christian law firm that was doing business law, and it had this other little thing that I had tacked on because I had a passion for it called integrity advising. I didn't really know what it was, but it was something I just felt we had to tack on. And one day I was sitting at my desk and just realizing my stomach was turning over this legal blog I had gotten. And my wife said, well, what's wrong? And I said, I just realized I don't want to do the kind of stuff I was doing before. And she said, well, maybe you shouldn't do it. What would make you wholehearted? I said, oddly, it's this little thing called integrity advising that I had felt this just compulsion to tack on to what this Integris was doing. And she said, well, maybe you ought to do that. And that began a journey of figuring out, what is that? What is that thing that I thought I really had to stick in there? As that sort of played out, I went to a retreat at the Moore House in Bridgeport. I highly recommend going to a retreat there. It's a wonderful place. And one of the exercises they went through was finding your personal mission statement. And what I was led to in that process was a mission statement that put together this 10-year journey and really this 50-year journey. Just sort of came out of this process. And the mission statement is to serve by redeeming work through the impartation of wisdom, spotlighting God's truth, and connecting its meaning to organizational cultures and practices. It was my why. And it was a huge day to sort of know in my heart this was my why. And I finally understood the bishop's prophetic word. That I can be a lawyer and a priest at the same time. 1 Peter 2:9 tells us, but you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Tim Keller says we are all high priests, prophets, and kings. And we can't forget that. So stage 7, Integris, living my why. The mission of Integris, which is a law firm, is to add to the beauty of the world, to humanize people, and to glorify God by encouraging and assisting the pursuit of integrosity by organizations and leaders. Integrosity is a word I made up. It's made up of the words integrity and generosity, and it's a state of being when there is an alignment in an organization between the biblical principles and values of the leaders and the values of the organization and the culture of the organization, where it builds a culture that actually reflects and reinforces those values such that when that is all working, people will do the right thing in the right way for the right reasons without thinking. In this, I think there are 3 divine purposes of work: to humanize people, to beautify the world, and to glorify God. Businesses humanize people by creating opportunities for people to exercise their God-given creativity and productivity in an environment of shalom where they're treated with dignity and respect. Businesses and organizations beautify the world by creating goods and services that help communities to flourish or to restore brokenness in the world. Each of us every day has an opportunity, I believe, to beautify the world. Everything we do, we are partners in God's project for this earth, for his kingdom. And we make a choice. We can either bring it a little closer to that or a little further apart. And everything we do is to glorify God. And that business is merely a tool through which we live out the commandment to glorify God and to love others and to love our neighbors. If that is our purpose, it must be the purpose of the institution made up of people. The 4 steps to integrosity are renew, reimagine, realign, and restore. First, renew your mind about God's purpose for work and business. Then begin to reimagine your work, reimagine your organization with that renewed thinking. And once you've reimagined it, begin to realign it, to realign the culture, to realign the values, to realign the mission. And finally, restoration, to watch the fruit. There are 4 key mind shifts that have to happen. One is the what, who, why, and how. The what is that faith can't fit into work. It's not about bringing your faith into your work. It's about bringing your work into your faith. Your faith is your life. Your work is a part of it. The who, you're not what you do. Our identity is not our job. Our identity is as a follower of Jesus. That has to be our primary identity. Our second identity can be a follower of Jesus practicing law, a follower of Jesus who is in law enforcement, a follower of Jesus in business. But if we mix it up, we will always sacrifice our secondary identity to maintain our success in our primary identity. And if our primary identity is the job and Jesus is number two, if we are a Christian businessman, we are first a businessman and second a Christian. The adjective modifies the noun. Don't be a Christian businessman. Why? Greed is not the creed. The huge mind shift is that the purpose of business cannot be about profit. Profit can't be the end of business. It is an absolutely necessary means to the end, because without it, you don't have a sustainable organization and you don't have access to capital. But if profit is the end and purpose to which you manage the business, people by definition can never be more than tools of production to be managed. If people and the maximization of human flourishing is the end and purpose of an organization, everything else falls into place. And finally, the how. Symbols are secondary. One of the messages I think gets it wrong is saying that you are not really living out your faith in an organization unless you put all of these Christian symbols all over it and you're overt about what you're doing. I think that just scares a lot of people away and is actually the wrong thing for many organizations. And that really there's a continuum from the covert to the overt. And finding the right place is something that the Holy Spirit will lead you to. At the covert end, the things you do may be look very much like what a secular business does. The difference is they're doing it because they've determined that being nice to people is good for the bottom line. You're doing it because you know it's what God has called you to do, and it's the right thing to do. So very quickly, some lessons that I've learned in the course of this journey. Priorities, mine were backwards. If you had asked me my priorities way back, it was work, because I believe that if you were a good provider, you were by definition a good husband and a good father. It would have been work, children, spouse, and God. And I realized that was completely backwards. It had to be God, spouse, children, and work. And we can't confuse our work with God. And this often happens in Christian ministries, I think, where people think that because it's this ministry, that work is actually that first priority God, and their families suffer. Wherever you're working, that's work. That comes down below your wife and your kids. Identity, I've said it there, what our primary identity has to be as a follower of Jesus. A bigger gospel. One of the huge things I learned was the difference between a 4-chapter and a 2-chapter gospel. I encourage you to look into this. If you think about God's story, right, it is creation, the fall, redemption, restoration. Unfortunately, the church often preaches only the 2 middle chapters of that gospel. You're a sinner, Jesus came to save you. You don't know why you're here, and you don't know where you're going. If you don't know your why and where you're off to, you really can't do much with that middle. You don't know that work is sacred, because it was in Genesis that God created work as a good thing before the fall. In fact, I would argue that the way God created us and created work, you cannot be fully human unless you are working and you're finding fulfillment in your work. It is part of our humanity. And if we don't know the end, if we don't know about God's plan for the restoration of his kingdom, we really don't understand why we're doing this. But if you understand that, we see that our work is actually partnering with God in his restoration project for his kingdom, for this world. And now we have a purpose. Now we have a why beyond making a paycheck and getting by until tomorrow and making it until Jesus returns. Integrity. Our work is part of our faith, not vice versa. And balance. I hate work-life balance. You know what work-life balance says? It says that work is not part of our life. Our work is something that keeps us from life. But I actually think if you go back to Genesis, work is essential to life. Work is essential to our humanity. And if we allow ourselves to see them as these competing forces, we will never actually realize our full humanity. Beauty, our work is part of that restoration project. People, God loves people most. We are all created in the image of God. Can you go through your workday treating everybody as created in the image of God? How that would change things. I saw a great phrase the other day, love people, use things, not love things, use people. How often do we get that flipped around? Grace for others. I learned from Brene Brown, this was hard for me to get, that everybody is doing the best they can. Even the serial killer is doing the best they can, given all the circumstances and all the givens. And it was hard for me to internalize that, but I think to walk through life realizing that everybody is actually doing the best they can. And if I was in their place with exactly the same circumstances and everything was the same, I would likely be doing the same thing they're doing. It helps me have a lot of grace. And grace for me, Tim Keller's teaching that there is no plan B. That, God, no matter what I do, God does not wake up one morning and say, oh my gosh, I can't believe Paul did that today. I never imagined he would do that. My entire plan for his life is thrown off course. No. He is beyond time. The things that I do, he knew before I was born that was going to happen. It's not that he dictated it, but he knew it was going to happen. And the plan for my life takes that into account. There is no plan B for your life, guys. Don't think that you've been thrown off it. It's all part of what he's weaving together, so have heart. And then my story. It was hard to me to get this one. My wife taught me this one, that my story isn't the story. And so I often catch myself saying when somebody reacts some way or says something, what story am I telling myself about this situation? And is that the real story? The journey, run to, not from. Make sure that when you're running to something and not just running from something. And don't long for the Egypt that God has left behind you. Commitment, when God calls, burn the bridge. Trust, don't forget in the dark what God said in the light. Provision, a faucet is not a source of water, and a job is not a source of provision. A faucet is merely a distribution mechanism to distribute water from a massive reservoir somewhere. And a job is just one way that God is providing for you at a moment in time. It is coming from his vast reservoir of provision. And if he turns a faucet off, don't lose heart. He has promised he will always have a faucet on. But open your eyes and look for what that other one may be. Obedience, follow the rabbit trail even if you don't see a rabbit. Sometimes the paths that I was being led down seemed pointless. Like, why would I do this? And then I realized, well, when I did this, it led me to that, which led me to this, which led me to that. And that made sense. But it was that first rabbit trail that seemed to make no sense at all, but to just take that leap of faith and follow it. Contentment, a couple of years ago, when I was asked what were the, sort of sitting around a table of chapter leaders, what were the best things that happened last year and the worst things, I had this revelation, I had no worst things. That all I had were things that God had allowed that I didn't understand yet. And presence, the saying we've said here a number of times, our today is robbed by our expectation of a tomorrow. So let's live in today. So let me finish with a question. How many of you are in full-time Christian ministry? Thanks, guys.